Hi, Misha here, and this is a bit of a journey, a story for a project I put together for a friend, a customer, but really mostly a friend, an AR-15 pistol. I assembled it using, known parts, but since we were going to be really near the range, and even though it was nearly 100 degrees, I told him, well, I always like to test fire things when I can, so run a couple of mags through it, make sure it works before handing it over to him here in a couple of days. So I thought I would make a little video talking about what it is, why it had to be done, how we're going to test it, and, because it's me, history. So here is the gun as put together by me. This is a current Colt factory 933 or 6933. Basically, the R933 is the select fire version, and the 6933 is the semi-automatic SBR version. Upper. This features an 11.5-inch barrel, 7-inch gas system, standard M4 type handguards, Picatinny upper. Comes standard with a Magpul, M-bus rear sight, forward assist, port door. So the upper is all Colt, but the lower, well, we couldn't just use a Colt lower because Colt has never officially made, and I actually asked Colt directly this, a pistol lower. In fact, even all their spare part lowers they ship are technically on their books as rifles, even if they never had a barrel attached. This is a bit of an issue because the way the law is written, and it's a technicality for sure, you can convert a pistol into a rifle. In other words, you could take a pistol AR lower and put a 16-inch barrel on it, making it into a rifle. But you are not supposed to take a rifle lower and put a pistol upper on it, even if you do remove the buttstock and put on a stabilizing arm brace like we've done here with the SBA. So, had to use a different lower. Ended up going with an ATI, a perfectly decent lower, and using mostly GI parts inside, including a buffer. Of course, we have a pistol rear end plate. So, even though I've put together more than one AR in my life, since we were going to be able to test it, and because I didn't want to give a friend a gun that may have hidden issues, we were going to run a few rounds through it, just enough. I had some of these contract mags and FDE with the blue followers, so threw a few of those in. And just as a control, I brought this out in case we were having problems. I always like bringing a control gun out when I'm testing. This is my Midwest Industries GAW 5A takedown gun. Ironically, this gun was originally what my friend wanted when he saw this of mine. He tried quite hard to talk me out of it, but I'm rather partial to this. And after waiting a year to see if any more came in stock, which they didn't, he switched over to this when I had some Colt uppers come in. So, hope he is satisfied. They both have the same brace. You'll actually notice the Colt is ever so slightly shorter. That's because the Midwest actually has a barrel around 12.5 inches. So with that, we've got our gun and our test gun, and we have our magazine. And I'm going to be honest with you, since this was just a test fire day, and since I'm getting somewhat low on brass case ammo, and I've got a few guns that really do need it, yeah, we're going to test this with some Wolf and some Brown Bear. So stay tuned for that later in the video. But I really want to contextualize, talk about the history of this gun, the so-called Colt M4 Commando. Kind of talk about what makes this different from other variations, how it came to be, who's used it, and some of the technical differences with the gas port bolt, things like that. let's just have some fun talking about AR pistols. Going back to the 1960s, we have my Troy XM177E2, one of the first successful and mass-produced versions in the Colt series. It has a model of 629. These were released in 1967 and were among the first, but not the first. In fact, the first was Colt's Model 605, appearing in 1964. Basically, they just took a 20-inch XM16E1 and chopped the barrel down to 15 inches, retaining the same rifle-length gas system, putting on the 3-prong flash hider, keeping the fixed stock, and yeah, they saved 5 inches, and they were quickly amazed to learn that it didn't work so good, and it wasn't that much shorter. So in 1965, they introduced what was technically the first carbine, or later Car 15 would become more of an analogous name. That would be the Model 607, or as the military would designate it, the GX 5857, a personal favorite of mine. This was the first to have a carbine-length gas system. It had a 10-inch barrel, still having, of course, the original 1 in 12 twist, though. Originally, it had a 3-prong flash hider. It also was the first to introduce the carbine-style extension, and it was 2-position, but it actually was made not from a Car 15 stock, but a cut-down E1 stock. It's an interesting thing. I've had one in the past. I don't currently have one. It was very compact, quite light, but they still had some reliability issues. Also, tremendous muzzle flash and noise, concussion. Operators were less than impressed, but a few Navy SEALs and others did try them out in Vietnam, but only a couple hundred probably were made. And that gets us to the XM177 here. The first wave was the 609 and 610. The only difference, the 609 had a forward assist, and the 610 did not. The 09 was designated XM177E1, and the 610 XM177. They were the first to introduce the now iconic Car 15 stock, only in 2 positions though, and originally made of metal. Most of the other parts were E1/A1, and they were the first to introduce these round single heat shield handguards, which actually would carry on for decades. But the 09 and 10 models had a 10-inch barrel. Now, one thing that had been trialed out with the late 607s, they went from using the 3-prong flash hider to a 3.5-inch moderator. It wasn't really a flash hider because it wasn't slotted at the end. It was basically a tube. It was designed to really cut down on concussion and noise a little, just make it a little more pleasant. But think about it. If you put a 3.5-inch device on a 10-inch barrel, once you screw it down, you're effectively at 13 inches. Nevertheless, the original XM177E1s had this, meaning that they too had a 13-inch, give or take, barrel assembly. But during their production run, which was quite brief in 1966 and into 1967, they would introduce this style of moderator, the 4.3-inch, so nearly an inch longer, meaning that when it was put on, the barrel was stretching out close to 14 inches, and this would have the slots and would be a more effective, more functional flash hider. If you look at World War II flash hiders, they're not slotted either. It was just kind of the thing. These, the originals, would quickly be supplanted in Colt's catalog by the 629 forward assist and 630 non-forward assist. The 29 would be the XM177E2, and the 30 would actually be adopted by the Air Force as the GAW-5A. And then later, that would be replaced by the updated version as the GAW-5AA. Ironically, sharing the same name as that takedown rifle. Totally different gun, though. These would be in 1967, 68, but Colt would only make these up until about 1970, and the military would buy them in quite small numbers, only a few thousand total. total, but it was the beginning. This is also when Colt started marketing them under the Commando name, which is why they're kind of relevant for today's video. I just like this gun. They're a lot of fun, but it was just the beginning, and this is where the product line actually starts to split. So the first generation carbines, or later Commandos, had 10-inch barrels. With the 629 and 630, and also the 639 and 640, the export models, we go to 11.5 inches. This gave a lot of benefits for not a lot of extra length. Better range, better accuracy, less flash, more reliability, because you actually have a bit of dwell time now. But they're still using that 4.3-inch moderator, meaning now we're over 15.5 inches long if you include it. These are also proving to have an issue of carbon buildup. They had a baffle in. Yes, they are technically moderators, sound suppressors by the NFA today, but they weren't meant for disassembly and cleaning, so eventually they would become useless as sound suppressors. Then in 1968, the Gun Control Act and other legal changes made it very difficult for Colt to export Title III, Class III things, even to military customers abroad. So they introduced the Model 653. And there, they extended the barrel out to 14.5 inches and then added an A1 flash hider, giving us a barrel length about 15.5 inches, a little more closer to 16, meaning we had the same barrel length as the 11-inch, but because we got rid of the moderator, you can see the benefits. We have yet better range and great reliability, and we're able to use a bayonet. So the 653 was quite popular, but it was still the A1 style with the 1 in 12 twist. Next step came with the adoption of the 62 grain NATO standard and the 1 in 7 twist. This is a good representation here of a 723 model, and that was essentially a 653 but with some newer features. Now the 723 still usually had A1 sights, but it started to have the round forward assist, A2 pistol grip. It got rid of the metal stock for a polymer, so-called Vibrolite, and we would transition over time from a 2 to a 4 position extension, but we're actually still using the same single heat shield handguard. Now an actual 723 is where kind of the split happens, because it had the 14.5-inch barrel, and it was classified as a CAR 15 or carbine, sometimes called the M16A2 carbine. There was also a 733. That was a Commando version with the 11.5-inch. Even though there were more demand for the 14.5, Colt would keep the 11.5 around for police users, special forces, and eventually it would also kind of come in helpful for those wanting to run a suppressor. So the 733 would have a fixed carry handle, usually with A1 sights, but sometimes A2, and be like this gun here, just shorter. In the 1960s, we just had the rifle, 20-inch, and we had the carbine or Commando, enlisted with a 10 and later 11.5-inch. Interestingly, Colt started marketing them as submachine guns, kind of trying to compete with, say, the MP5 as it became more popular. And then the M16A2 carbines and M16A2 Commandos came out, the so-called Black Hawk Downs. And the U.S. military would actually buy some of the 723s with the 14.5-inch barrel, but they bought very few, if any, of the 733s. But where they would hit success, of course, would be with the M4 carbine in 1994. That would be the Colt Model 920. And while the earliest ones had a fixed carry handle, basically by the time they went into production, it was the removable. And then later they would even quit doing the carry handle. They would also soon introduce these double heat shield ovular handguards. And actually the original guns still used the Fiberlight stock up until at least 2000. The 4-position extension is standard. And to kind of track with that, the M16A2 M16A2 Commando was updated with a Picatinny, and that's what we have here. This is a 933. And basically, it's just an M4, but with an 11.5-inch barrel instead of 14. Interestingly, the first several years they used the old CAR-15 handguards. In fact, they would not stop using them until about 2008, 2009, when Colt canceled them altogether. So those made the last decade or so have the M4 handguard. Likewise, the M4 stock would become standard. And it's just a short-E version. Not much use by the U.S. military, although it has seen some export sales to South America and some African nations. There are mixed reports about if Israel has some. Some say yes, some say no. It's a specialist gun, but it's actually what Colt really prefers. The U.S. military kind of went a different direction. But with that, we've talked enough. Let's finally get around to running the first mag and see if my friend's gun will work or be a problem child. Colt 11-inch Commando first test fire. Held open.
So far, so good.
Okay, so first rattle out of the box. It ran, and that was with steel cased ammo. Not always the thing with shorties. Shorties are pretty temperamental, and I think we'll kind of talk about why. Even though I brought the GA5 out, looks like we probably won't need it. But let's talk about a bit of the interior and kind of talk about the difference between the CAR-15/carbine and the Commando line and the Mark 18. And here is my Daniel Defense Mark 18 Mod 1. This is actually why I don't personally own an M4 Commando, because this is more what the U.S. military is rocking with, and that's kind of what I enjoy. The M4, like I said, has a 14.5-inch medium heavy profile barrel. You know the specs, probably better than me. And the A1 is safe, single, full, and the original M4 was safe, single, burst. And it typically has an H buffer. The Commando, since it was never American U.S. standard, several versions have existed. The 733 was safe, single, full. There was a model 735, which was safe, single, 3-round burst. And there was even a model 738. This is still back in the M16A2 Commando days with the fixed carry handle. The 638 had all four. It had a 4-way selector. So it had safe, single, through round burst, and full auto. Kind of interesting. When they went to the 933, that was safe, single, and full. And the 935 was safe, single, 3-round. They got rid of the 4-way selector because apparently no one wanted it. But the U.S. military, Crane and LMT and a few others kind of all work together, and that's where we get the Mark 18. This has a 10.3 inch, I know some say 10.5, barrel. So an inch or a little bit shorter than Colt's. Colt was not a fan of this barrel length. They had experience with 10-inch barrels back in the 60s. Maybe it scarred them. They really believed in their 11.5 inch. However, the U.S. military wanted the 10.3. So Colt would acquiesce. Now with the Mark 18, you have to make quite a few changes. Typically an H2 buffer. You have to rework the spring, the extractor, the ejector, and the bolt. And government spec is for a very large gas port on this carbine length gas system. The M4 Commando is far less extreme. It has an H buffer, at least as standard, just like the M4. The only time you're really going to see an H2 in it from the factory is if you have the heavy barrel, heavy under the handguard, like say an M4 A1 style. So they'll put an H2 there. But what's kind of neat is the bolt group is identical, is the same as in the M4. It doesn't require special springs or anything like that. They do slightly expand the gas port with the Commando, but not near as much as with the Mark 18. So maybe Colt was right for once. Maybe saving that inch wasn't worth it when you looked at all the changes that needed to be made and just extra wear and tear on the system. Regardless, that's what the government wanted, so Colt would introduce their version as well with the 10.3 inch barrel, adding to the line. We have the M4 carbine, we have the M4 Commando, and Colt's version of this is called the M4 CQB. So, I don't know, I found it kind of neat. I like minutiae like that, though. Now, J-Rail with the Colt.
Looks nice.
So here are the AR pistols. Of course, they're all in 5.56 NATO. The only major difference being the barrel length and, of course, the takedown on the Midwest. Since the build gun is running fine, we don't really need the Midwest gun, but since it's out there and it's one of mine that I actually enjoy shooting, let's put a mag through it too, just because. Gal 5 pistol. She held open. Yep, it was quite hot that day, but why not? Didn't need it, but it was there. And I've done several videos looking at the whole point behind this gun, why the U.S. Air Force has it. It's not designed as a commando gun, special forces, it's a survival gun. So that explains why the longer barrel and takedown system. This really is an iconic Colt design, though. But it is a bit traditional. And it is a direct descendant from the XM177, too. Of course, the Mark 18, Mod O, and now Mod 1, and even further, are a much newer Spec Ops gun. And they have their own attributes. They are very compact, and thanks to the changes to the gas port and bolt group and buffer and what have you, they are quite reliable and actually very suppressor friendly too. We didn't take the Mark 18 out that day, but just for fun, here's an older clip of it stretching its legs and having a bark too. Mark 18. Alrighty, well, I just thought this might make kind of a fun video. You don't hear as much about the Commandos today. And I think the distinction between Car 15/Carbine and Commando and CQB is kind of interesting that Colt keeps them apart. And all the different trigger groups and furniture options, that's Colt for you. They build however. You'll notice with these newer ones, they don't have the Colt mark. Instead, they have the cage code. That should be on the upper receiver, barrel, and in parts of the bolt as well. That's just modern military markings. And of course, you can attach whatever you'd want on it. It is kind of a neat compromise between rifle and carbine. The 11.5 inch really does give pretty good range. It's good to at least 200 meters, maybe almost 300. That'd be kind of pushing it, but maybe with a good shot. And it doesn't seem to be ammo sensitive, but it's still not as practical as a M4 or any 14.5 inch gun. Mark 18 is kind of its interesting thing. The idea of an AR pistol has been around for many years, but it had very limited success and interest until the arm brace came along. Once that popped in 10 years ago now, it made guns like this a lot more practical and useful backpack guns or car defense guns or what have you. You could have the commonality of parts with your other ARs, but you can reduce several inches off a standard carbine. But anyway, like I said, originally my friend actually wanted one of these Midwest guns, but we haven't found them in stock anywhere for a while, so I think he'll be happy with this. I've built these in the past, or assembled them. Build's a bit of a strong word, frankly, for other people, and they seem to like them. And it's a classic Colt Commando. Same name used, be it the XM177, the M16A1, M16A2, or M4. Commando is a name that Colt has hung on to. Heck, there was the Commando revolver in World War II. Colt likes that name. So, let me know what you think. Appreciate you hanging out, and think you should be thankful you weren't out shooting that day. It was sweltering. As always, if you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. And if you'd like to help support the channel, please check out the link to the Patreon page. This is Misha. Catch you very soon. Next time.